As far as I'm concerned, it was game over at the end of 2006. There was no deniability for CEOs anymore. They should have shut this activity down within their investment banks, and they didn't, because they knew that people wouldn't understand what was going on. Most Americans wouldn't understand. Most congressmen wouldn't understand, and they could get away with it. So they accelerated that activity.
The implication in this entire process is A, that the American people aren't smart enough to know what the heck is happening. B, that it's unnecessary for our elected officials to communicate what is happening to them. Thirdly, that the people who presided over the creation of this crisis are suddenly smart enough to know what to do about it. I mean, this is an absurdity.
AIG is this massive insurance company, but they also had a division called AIG Financial Products, which would offer something called a credit default swap.
A credit default swap is a contract between two people, one of whom is giving insurance to the other that he will be paid in the event that a financial institution or a financial instrument fails.
So it's an insurance contract?
It is an insurance contract, but they've been very careful not to call it that, because if it were insurance, it would be regulated.
AIG essentially facilitated the creation of a lot of these mortgage securities by essentially providing an insurance policy should they go bad. But because the derivatives market had been deregulated, AIG could do this without any requirement to put up any reserves. It's like an insurance company selling you a life insurance policy and not having any money when the time came to pay off. And the time came to pay off.
Guaranteed by the taxpayer.
Dreamed up investment schemes that they themselves don't even understand, with their derivatives, credit default swaps, and mortgage-backed securities. They tried to make their own rules.
Guaranteed by the taxpayer.
We are here to try to explain to you what it is we do here.
We are commodities brokers, William. Now, what are commodities? Commodities are agricultural products, like coffee that you had for breakfast, wheat, which is used to make bread, pork bellies, which is used to make bacon, which you might find in a bacon and lettuce and tomato sandwich.
This is sad.
And then there are other commodities like frozen orange juice and gold. Though, of course, gold doesn't grow on trees like oranges. Now, some of our clients are speculating that the price of gold will rise in the future, and we have other clients who are speculating that the price of gold is going to fall.
Like a baby.
They place their orders with us, and we buy or sell their gold for them.
Tell them the good part.
The good part, William, is that no matter whether our clients make money or lose money, Duke and Duke get the commissions.
Well, what do you think, Valentine?
Well, it sounds to me like you guys are a couple of bookies.
I told you he'd understand.
Yeah, this is just a straight-up price-fixing oligopoly. Just to put it, it's kind of like Bookies in Las Vegas. Imagine if all the casinos in Las Vegas got together and conspired to make the football lines non-published, so that when you went to go to bet on a game, nobody knew what the spread was on the game. That's exactly what we're dealing with derivatives. Nobody knows what the prices are of credit default swaps and interest rate swaps. So when these clients go in the market to buy this stuff, one side is buying too high and the other side is buying too low, and then they take all the fat in between.
Derivative we're talking about here, it's not like a stock, something that's a share in a company that you can buy and sell, and you're buying and sell an actual stake in the company. This is a derivative of a stake in a company or a stake in a certain financial instrument. It is basically a bet, a contract between two people. If something goes up, I'll pay you this. If something goes down, I'll take this or pay you this.
Declaring that something has value because of the fact that you traded it, even if the only entity to which you traded it was another part of yourself.
Guaranteed by the taxpayer.
So you have $1 million worth of mortgages, you put an insurance policy on it for $1 million, and then you place a bet on that insurance, which is what AIG was doing. And then you place a bet on that insurance policy, say a $100 million bet that $1 million won't go bad. And then you place a $1 billion bet on a $100 million bet. And you place a $100 billion bet on a $1 billion bet. They just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the GDP of the entire planet is in the neighborhood of $56 trillion. And we had 800 to 900 trillion dollars worth of derivatives. It's just bets. And when that collapsed, it was massive.
Derivatives on commodities ranging from jet fuel, factoring into your airline ticket price, to this year's harvest, factoring into the cost of your food, are bought and sold in secret, trillions of dollars worth. But only the biggest Wall Street financial firms know how much you pay for them. Why? Because when two parties make these bets on, for instance, wheat prices, neither one knows how much the other is getting or paying. Only the middleman, Wall Street, knows that. Which means no one knows how much Wall Street skims off the top for itself. Which means no one knows how much this skimming adds to the price you eventually pay for the bread made from that wheat they're betting on.
So we're connecting the dots today on banking. And it all started when capital requirements, the basic regulator of all capitalism, vanished for some, shall we say, special bankers.
Traded in the dark without capital in the 21st century. They call it the swaps market, and it's Wall Street lingo for selling credit insurance. It effectively ended capital requirements for those special bankers and allowed them exclusively to trade and place bets without having the actual cash to back it up. You can't even do that in Vegas. This rogue, secretive market created a $700 trillion global gambling parlor and reversed incentives away from traditional investment in entrepreneurship into speculation and debt manufacturing. And it gets worse. In order to fund this game, the special bankers solicit money from teacher, police, and civil pension managers. These pension managers rely on gatekeepers, called ratings agencies, to determine low-risk investments. Many pensions are only authorized to purchase from the highest-rated funds, AAA. And here's where the misaligned interests come in. The special bankers who do not deserve AAA status pay off the very rating agencies the pension customers depend on to make that evaluation. Making matters worse, in Washington, our tax code is written by bought and paid for politicians to reward speculators and extractors while punishing savers, investors, and inventors. Then, in 2008, we were introduced to the concept of too big to fail. If these special bankers go under, their cascade of failures would threaten our society's most basic necessities. So Washington promises to bail them out no matter what the cost. And these VIP passes allow the too big to fail banks to blackmail society into keeping the extraction game going. It's a vicious cycle that infects everything from housing to jobs to even the cost of food around the world.
The public is basically drowning in credit default swaps and derivatives and collateralized
and it's
securities
very simple,
and all that stuff.
and it's really much simpler than that, isn't it? It was a lot of bad lending that was tolerated and a lot of packaging of those bad loans and selling them with false labels that kept the party going and that kept draining money out of mainstream America and set us up for a huge fall. That's not hard to understand.
Credit default swaps, the derivatives, all the different things that, that we talked about back in 2007, 2008, have we recovered in that world?
Some of the esoteric things have come back, and they say, the designers say, in much safer forms. Some of these structures have been retired, I think, for good.
Like what?
Oh, come to think of it, I'm going to withdraw that because I just heard that collateralized bond obligations, another one of these things, is back.
The risky bets, the stupid moves, none of it has changed. The unregulated swaps market is multiple times larger than the entirety of the economy. It is completely unregulated and an absolute fiasco.
I couldn't agree with you more.
It's just a fact.
People think it's, the stock market's big, the bond market's big. No, it's not compared to derivatives. Huge.
None of the things that caused the financial breakdown, the collapse of the entirety of the economic system of most of the world have been changed. None of them. It all still happens. It's all bigger. The banks are bigger. The market's bigger. And nobody seems to be paying any attention or care at all.
You should tell our viewers, though, because I would imagine many of them will not really understand the highly complicated world of credit default swaps.
Right.
This was done by what was called a proprietary trading desk. All of the investment banks have them, but in the old days, investment banks made their money by matching up investors and people who needed money. Right. These trading desks are something, they're a relatively new creation, and they have traditionally made a lot of money for the banks.
Right. Well, they have, and obviously this is the core of what the Volcker rule is trying to get at, is to ban
trading, a bank taking directional bets on the market just to generate profits, not to accommodate a customer, but to generate profits for itself.
One law professor who's been following bailout issues says there are no clear rules.
All these things, it seems to me, we need to have some guidelines ahead of time so we're not just doing this on an ad hoc basis.
The government so far has come to the aid of companies it said were too big to fail. It did not rescue Lehman Brothers, but felt it had to help AIG because of its vast reach.
It has done the same thing with others, like the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board is answerable to nobody, President or the Congress, yet we created it in 1913. And all I've been saying all the time I've been in the Congress is, it's about time the Congress lived up to its constitutional commitments, which it cannot delegate, contrary to all the opinions that have been advanced. And here's a good example. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. All power tends to corrupt, even our meager power. So eternal vigilance is still the price we must pay for the preservation of our democracy and our basic liberties, which I say are a far greater risk than the average American wants to realize.
Frankly, Wolf, the federal government is inventing some new powers to blunt this crisis. The Treasury and the Fed simply must get confidence back into the banking system to unfreeze lending and get the oxygen flowing back to the American economy.
The Federal Reserve taking on more and more responsibility. It was never designed to take on. Its real job ought to be keeping the dollar stable and monetary policy. Instead, it's taken on this. So, resolution trust idea seems to me to be what we've got.
I think it's a scam. And the reason I think it's a scam is because, you know, what you have here, for example, at Goldman Sachs, okay, they got a lot of bad debt.
Big investment banking house.
Do we know what the inventory is? Answer, no. Goldman Sachs, give us your inventory. There are billions of dollars in funds waiting to buy distressed debt in the United States. They're waiting for that, but they don't have a market price for it. There's a market for everything. Goldman may not want to sell it at whatever the market price is, but we need to know what that inventory is. And the excuse that, well, they're going to tell the RTC, but they don't want to tell the...
But you don't think there wasn't a meltdown this week, do you?
The bigger issue here is either we accept the fact that we're facing a crisis in our fiscal, in the markets, or
okay, tell me what the crisis is.
The crisis is that we run the risk of credit drying up.
Says who?
Well, apparently there are a great many experts, economic experts who've come forward.
There is no active market for many of these securities. And thus, today, the fire sale price may be much less than the hold-to-maturity price. If the Treasury bids for and then buys assets at a price close to the hold-to-maturity price, there will be substantial benefits. So in summary, I believe that under the Treasury authority being requested, a program can be undertaken that will help establish reasonable hold-to-maturity prices for these assets. Doing that will restore confidence and liquidity to financial markets and help the economy recover without an unreasonable fiscal burden on taxpayers.
This is a really key point because, of course, at the heart of the financial crisis are these so-called distressed assets. The value of these assets is enormously controversial. They may be worth very little. So if the Fed has accepted distressed assets as collateral in exchange for these loans, there's a very good chance that taxpayers aren't going to be getting this money back. So Bloomberg News has launched a lawsuit in federal court to find out who has received the loans and what has been accepted as collateral, because they believe that this lack of transparency is illegal. So that's why we're calling this the $1 trillion crime scene.
That's got to have a hit on the taxpayers.
$1 trillion to bail out AIG, Bear Stearns, Freddie Mac, and Fannie Mae.
And the $85 billion that was loaned to AIG was not appropriated by Congress. Nobody asked Congress to make a vote on that. Am I right?
No, that was a decision taken by the Fed with the support of
Treasury. And what source of money did they use to get that $85 billion?
They use their funds.
And their funds emanate from where?
From the U.S. government.
Well, were they fees from other banks? Were they come from your Treasury? Where did they come?
They come from the Fed. Obviously, can print money.
Paul, is anybody in this crisis making money? Oh, yes.
Actually, right now, with a lot of short selling banned, I'm not sure
The people that bought the credit default swaps are making trillions. The people that bought the credit default swaps are going to be the richest people in the world. The people that bought the credit default swaps are making literally trillions. Literally trillions.
I don't think that's right, but we could have that discussion another time.
Look, the insurers couldn't be losing trillions if the people who bought the insurance weren't making trillions. It's
not really
an equation.
Anyway,
yes,
not really true, but okay. It's
over $1 trillion was lost in the stock market today. Susie Orman, where did the money go?
The money went vaporized because as the stocks go down, people take losses, the money is gone.
Money simply evaporated.
Okay, and did they take money that they had from fees charged to member banks, or did they print money to accommodate this $85 billion?
You'd have to ask the Fed that.
All right, you're not aware during the discussions where that was?
I'd like them to answer that question.
Well, you may not like to answer the question, sir, but if you know the information, I'm asking you to share with us what is your best understanding of where that money came from.
My best understanding is all dollars are green, so those are ultimately taxpayer dollars, and that was why
we're painfully aware that they're taxpayer dollars.
That was why the Treasury was supportive, and we were very supportive of that transaction.
Okay. We all understand that the full faith and promise comes to the government on that, the taxpayer dollars. We're painfully aware, but I'm asking you whether, since they didn't come to Congress for an appropriation, whether the $85 billion came from fees charged to member banks, was newly printed money, or some combination of the both.
I don't believe it came from fees charged from member banks.
All right, thank you.
I'm a free market guy, but I'm not going to let this economy crater in order to preserve the free market system.
At the peak up here, then buy them back down here for a fraction of the amount. Next day, the market rebounds, and all those stocks that you bought for nothing are worth, well, billions.
We are faced with the prospect of a global meltdown. And so we've responded with bold measures. I'm a market-oriented guy, but not when I'm faced with the prospect of a global meltdown.
We lead the people to a point of complete panic. Then we rein it all back in. This is where the markets will be Monday morning, opening bell.
Secretary Paulson, and I said, Mr. Secretary, we would like to meet with you tomorrow morning because of some of the chaos we see in the markets. And he said back to me, Madam Speaker, it cannot wait until tomorrow morning. We have to come today.
Describe the mood last night when you heard the potential dire consequences of what we're talking about now. If the federal government were just not to do anything, what were you told would happen?
Well, I'm going to be reluctant to repeat exactly the words, not because I can't remember them, but because if I were to repeat them exactly, I'm fearful it might cause even more concern. I can't begin to tell you. I've been here for 28 years, Wolf. Been in a lot of very critical meetings involving a lot of important events over the last quarter of a century. I can't recall another occasion when I was in a room where statements were made about the conditions of not only our economy, but the global economy, that caused every member in that room, the leadership of the House, the Senate, Republicans, Democrats, leaders of committees, that when Chairman Bernanke finished his appraisal, a brief appraisal, along with Hank Paulson, there was dead silence in the room for maybe 5 to 10 seconds. The oxygen went out of the room. People were stunned by what they heard. And I'm angry about this because I think this was preventable, I'll tell you, but we're not going to talk about that today because the issue is what do we do?
But this is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe even $1 trillion. Who knows what it's going to cost? Don't you think the American people have the right to know what you and your fellow members of Congress were told last night about the dire consequences of doing nothing?
Well, again, I'm telling you how dire it was without getting into the specific wording.
Head of the Federal Reserve, Bernanke, Hank Paulson, Secretary of the Treasury, walk in, tell the President of the United States, by 5 o'clock this afternoon, by close of business, we need $1 trillion cash infusion into the American financial system. If we don't get it, the American financial system will implode in 72 hours, the world financial system 3 days after that, and we will have global anarchy and chaos. The greatest enemies of the United States, Mussolini, Hitler, Tojo, the Soviet Union, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. Nobody's ever brought the United States to its knees like that day. Who did that? Who's responsible for that? The populist? Donald Trump? No, the elites. The financial, the corporate, the permanent political class that runs Washington, D.C. That's who did it. What was their solution? To create money and bail themselves out. On the day that happened, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve was $880 billion. When Donald Trump took the oath of office, January 20th, 2017, it was $4.5 trillion.
After all, we were the ones responsible. Secretary Paulson, it's in his book. Now, that's an honesty you won't find from Robert Rubin, who also came from Goldman Sachs into an administration, then went out to Citigroup. You won't find it from many. And what they do instead is they say, oh, we don't know. Who saw it coming? Hindsight is everything. There were many factors. It's a normal fluctuation in the business cycle, or it's a tulip craze, or it's this or that or that or that. How could we know? And my book is a very specific refutation of that idea. As I begin, I say, they did it. Yes, there is a they. The captains of finance, their lobbyists and allies among leading politicians of both parties who together destroyed an American regulatory system that had been functioning splendidly for most of the 6 decades since it was enacted in the 1930s. The subtitle of my book is How Reagan Republicans and Clinton Democrats Enriched Wall Street While Mugging Main Street.
In the case of this subprime mortgage, this entire credit fiasco, there are so many villains. So many people had their hand on the steering wheels. The financial system went over a cliff that holding up any one person and saying you're the one who caused it becomes a really difficult proposition. So sure, Wall Street CEOs and Wall Street executives played a role in what went on.
The business model of Wall Street is fraud. That's what it is.
Industrial up 89, NASDAQ up 61, S&P is up 18.